My name's Hayden Price, and I'm from South Wales in the UK.
You know, the very essence of the mental game is this. The only reason an event matters is because we make it matter.
Welcome to the Mullins Farrier podcast.
I had a soccer coach, and he always said, we are going to be the fittest team always out there. Because in the moment, you don't want to be worried about being tired. You want to be focused on the soccer game.
Right.
Which is what's going to translate for me, hopefully, in the CJF, is that I'm not worried about being tired. I can focus on the task at hand.
And granted, he was like, get your specimens made. 3 months before you take your exam, get all your AW specimens made. And it's good to have other people putting that pressure on you as well. Sometimes if it's a single journey, and you've not got mentors that are coaching you, helping you, you kind of rest a little bit.
If you're hearing this, you are currently on the non-subscriber feed. If you would like to hear this episode in its entirety, please subscribe using the link below. If you're a student, apprentice, or just find yourself in a situation where it isn't financially feasible to subscribe, please reach out to me on Facebook or through the website. The good folks at Out West Design and Fabrication are lending their support by helping us to cover your scholarship subscription. You can check out many of their incredible projects on their Facebook page. Out West Design and Fabrication, your choice for Farrier rigs. Now here's a sample of this week's episode. Thank you for listening.
Most people that I know in this industry only want the best for the other people in the industry, which is a pretty cool thing.
Welcome, everyone. A couple of shopkeeping items to cover here. To start, Dr. Simon Curtis has another webinar coming up Wednesday, September the 4th, the Hoof Balance 3 webinar, with speakers Simon, Matthew Jones, Mark Trussler, and David Nichols. They're going to explore 4 different trimming methods: hoof mapping, trimming the solar plane, the spiral trim, and the traditional 3-view trim. Go to eventbrite.co.uk and use the discount code Mullins for a hefty 30% off this time. Search the Hoof Balance 3 webinar on the Eventbrite website. The link will also be in the show notes below. So this marks the first episode of our subscription feed. If you're hearing this, you're not on that feed, but you can subscribe by clicking on the link in the show notes. It's come to my attention that some people in the United States specifically have been having trouble signing up for a subscription using their debit card. This is actually not a fault of the platform. We dug into it, and apparently some banks don't like to offer a subscription payment on their debit cards. We've been told that the remedy for this is simply reaching out to your bank and asking for this functionality to be turned on. If all that doesn't work, though, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'll do my best to help you out. And as I've said before, I don't want someone's financial situation to inhibit them from accessing our content. So apprentices, students, and those for whom a subscription isn't financially feasible, please reach out and we will get you sorted. Our longtime supporter, Out West Design and Fabrication, are lending a hand in this endeavor, and they're helping us to provide you with your scholarship subscription. So if you fall into this category, my only ask is that you would reach out to them and say thank you. Their generosity is pretty incredible. And now for today's guest, who is another gentleman from across the pond. You probably heard Hayden mentioned before quite fondly by Ben Benson in his episode. And Hayden has even been a guest as a panelist from a discussion I recorded at Focus a couple years back. I've had several folks explain to me the influence that Hayden has had on the farrier trade in the UK. And I believe our tech bro counterparts in the Silicon Valley would refer to him as a disruptor. He took some traditionally held precepts about shoeing and flipped them on their head. You'll hear him discuss a few of these in his own words in the following conversation. Clearly, his methodology worked, as he eventually went on to be the lead consultant farrier for 20 years to the British Equestrian Federation. and he served as the lead farrier for Team GB, whose results on the World Equestrian stage have spoken for themselves. Hayden is one of those folks whose energy is contagious, and his passion for what he does is palpable. We covered a lot of ground, but I feel like we could have done a whole other interview, and maybe we will someday. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. And you've been quite an influential person in the industry here.
Oh.
You should see the look on his face.
Well, for good or for bad?
For good. And it's been worldwide. Yeah.
That's nice to hear.
I did an interview with Ben. It wasn't the first time that he had mentioned that you really changed the way people approached shoeing sport horses. And there were a lot of things that you were observing that maybe in the competition ring are sought after, but in the competition ring of a sport horse event wouldn't necessarily serve the horse in the best way. One of them he was talking about was just fitting shoes fuller to compensate for the fact that I can't remember the exact line, something about, can you still see the shoe? Was that your term?
Okay. It goes back to one of the things that I first started, my perception of shoeing was that the day you shoe a horse, you shoe the horse for the end of the shoeing cycle and not the beginning of the shoeing cycle. And that basically means that when you then watch that horse in motion, in walk and trot, that at the end of the shoeing cycle, whatever you deem is appropriate, that there is a platform within the position and the style of the shoeing that you had placed in previously that still exists at the end of the shoeing cycle.
Right.
We're all acutely aware of how, feet change and dynamics over a period of time change, and then we come back and we redo it again, and then it sometimes gets away from you, and then you come back and do it again.
Yeah.
So it was that process. That's what they're referring to.
Okay. So I guess we should start at the beginning. How did you become a horseshoer in the first place?
Well, when I had my pony shod, my parents somehow managed to scrape enough money to buy me some riding lessons when I was 12. By the age of 14, I had my first pony. I had it shod for the first time, and I was so captivated by it that was when I think something had switched on within me. I then left school at 16, didn't do any higher examinations or anything, couldn't wait to get out of school, and then found an apprenticeship, and I started virtually straight away.
Okay. And who was your apprenticeship with?
My apprenticeship was with Tim Rooney from Cardiff.
Okay.
And who also trains Billy Crothers, which you will very much be familiar with.
Yep.
And Andy Martin, which is another one you'd be familiar with.
Yep.
We were very lucky. There was a group of us that worked very well together at that time.
Okay. And did you work with some of them at the same time?
Yeah. Billy and I were apprentices together.
Okay.
He was 12 months just in front of me. And then Andy Martin came along then about 18 months, 2 years after me. So at one time, there were the three of us all together.
That'd been quite the experience.
No, it would have been for Tim, yeah. In more ways than one, I think.
Right. From there, how did you end up becoming the person you are, known for shoeing sport horses?
We were very lucky. You may be aware that we've recently this year lost one of our lecturers, Alan Bailey, who was just inspirational in his teaching at Hereford College. He not only taught us anatomy and physiology, he allowed us the privilege of expanding our knowledge and understanding. And I had quite a few functional anatomical questions that we applied in shoeing. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
We were taught that shoeing horses was in this protocol, this procedure, and I had several questions within that in terms of function.
Mm-hmm.
So we were seeing a lot of horses that over a period of time with repetitive strain injury would get injured, etc., etc. And then I started to look at it and think, there must be a different way that we can do this. There must be a better way that we can do this to protect it. And I suppose it was just a natural progression for me then to start looking more into the dynamics. So looking at not just equine dynamics, but actually individual limb dynamics. Why were we shoeing horses behind the way we were?
Mm-hmm.
Why were we not protecting it? Why weren't we taking into account the fact that with some disciplines like dressage, we take a percentage of the weight off the front and we immediately put it on the back, like with jumpers. And was there a correlation with the injuries that we were seeing with proximal suspensory desmitis and things like that, hind limb, in relation to how we were shoeing horses? And that's really how it started.
Right. In doing that, you didn't have the technology back then that we do have now. So how were you observing it? Was this just watching your horses go and then experimenting with your shoeing, just progressively figuring it out, or how did you work that?
That's exactly how it was. It was because at the end of the day, we're practical people, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
We apply what we do and then see the effects of that. I was quite lucky because I was seeing positive results in some of the things that we were doing. And we weren't making a huge big deal about this. We were just taking apart the traditional sort of hunter style shoeing, if you like, and then applying a different process to it. We immediately then, over a period of time, started to see the benefits of that. But then, I don't know, there's something in you, I think, that says, okay, so I can stand there and I can tell people, but actually, wouldn't it be great if we could just be able to measure some of the effects that we were seeing? And then I thought, so how do you measure that? The most obvious thing to do is visually, so that you could pass that information on then. Hence the reason why I then started to take videos of horses before and after. And then I started to apply, if you're looking at hind limb, for example, I would put markers on the hind limb at strategic places on the hock. And that was to show people that the brain then can almost dismember the limb in motion, and the brain can pick up certain elements. So when you started to pick up things and say, do you see the difference in the change of the hock as a result of what we've done, or fetlock hyperextension, that you could see it. And then that then progressed to another stage then where I thought, God, wouldn't it be great if we could video it and then we could sort of somehow have some software that we could measure it as well. And then that started with me looking at different softwares that were available in other sports, including golf, which is the classic one, tennis, which was another one where they measure all different angles, they measure rotational values. And then we developed a system then, a video-based system, Equinalysis then, where I could, it's quite embarrassing when I look back now and I see how technology's moved on and what we've got today.
That's the problem with technology though, right?
But I think one of the things that you got to remember is, in those days, 20 years ago, nothing like this existed. We've got artificial intelligence now that can give us this, but 20 years ago and 25 years ago, we didn't have anything like that at all. So it was revolutionary for me that for the first time in my life, I could not only execute something, that we then could prove or disprove the worth of what we had done.
Right. Because there are trade-offs to everything. In taking the time to do that, it's a lot of time. It's also getting your clients to agree to allow you to do that. So you must have had to find like-minded people who were willing to put up with the extra time and effort that you were putting in. And then yourself. There are a lot of horseshoers, when I interview them, they'll tell me, I just want to shoe this many horses in a day, get it done. I don't like dealing with therapeutic things because then it eats away your time. How did you embrace that into your practice?
Well, it wasn't that difficult because in the early days, there were much reduced numbers of performance horses where I come from. It wasn't as if you had, 50 clients all wanted the same thing. There were like 6 or 7 clients that wanted something and wanted a change or wanted you to develop a better style of shoeing for them. So that wasn't difficult at all. In terms of time, it doesn't actually take that much longer to shoe a horse how you want to shoe it, opposed to how a horse you think should be shod. What takes the time is then if you decide to video it before and video it afterwards.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
I took the commercialism out of shoeing. I'm very much a realist, and I realized that when you've got bills to pay and you've got food to put on the table and you've got a mortgage to pay, there is a commercial aspect to shoeing.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's a different aspect to it. And it's no different to, you see here today with the International Horseshoeing Competition. Stop and think about these guys. How much time did they spend in the forge?
Right.
Where did they find that time?
Mm-hmm.
Their personal time suffers, their family time suffers, but actually they are so passionate about something they find the time.
Right.
I suppose with me, I was the same. I can't remember thinking, oh God, this is taking heaps and heaps of my time
Right.
because I wanted to know the answers.
Yeah.
So it's a journey you're on, and you think, but like perfecting that perfect horseshoe, you keep practicing until you get it. And for me, mine is a slightly different angle.
No, that's a really good analogy. So I talked a bit about this with Ben, but it's always good to hear other people's takes on it. Sometimes even just hearing in somebody else's words, it'll drive the point home that I might not have caught the first time. So in talking about the hind end, one of the things you mentioned was the hyperextension of the fetlock. What were some of the ways that you adjusted your shoeing to help with that? I imagine it had something to do with extension of heels, and how did you address that?
It was exactly as you've summed up. I was shoeing horses probably with more support in the heel area than had hitherto been done, certainly within our area. Medial lateral imbalance is a big one. We've just heard the Mark Trussler is talking about medial lateral imbalance, and that was a big one for me because you have to remember that, I'm from a generation that was brought up with hunter style shoeing. So it's tight on the inside, slightly wide on the outside, so asymmetric. And then I went to put in symmetrical shoes on, which freaked people out because farriers, vets, and some horse owners, because they suddenly had not ridiculous amounts of material, but it would be wider on the inside and longer on the inside than they'd been used to. And then we had this constant sort of same discussion process. What on earth is going to happen because it's going to catch itself? Right. It's going to cut itself. And a lot of people put a lot of trust in me when I then said, yes, but what's going to happen is the position of the hind limb is going to change and it's going to widen and it's going to do this and the flight pattern is going to be different. So I was very fortunate. A lot of people put a lot of faith in some of my theories. And of course, blimey, Charlie, I've just come back from the Asian Games. Now, we have horses there that were from all parts of Asia. And kid you not, you stand outside your barn and you watch different nations walk up and down and go past. And it doesn't matter whether it's a jumper or whether it's an eventer or whether it's a dressage horse. That style of shoeing is now worldwide. Mm-hmm. You are now seeing it thanks to manufacturing companies producing these shoes for us as well.
Right.
What started off as a little sort of idea, it's quite pleasing, really.
It's too bad this is audio that people can't see the smile on your face right now as you talk about it.
You don't own it, but you think you've had just a small part to play in it. And it wasn't easy. I tell you now, it wasn't. You talk about, the downsides of things sometimes. When we started to then we're used now to fit in perhaps a bit more lateral support with a horse that's got a particular condition. I cannot begin to tell you the discussions I used to have with vets that would tell me, no, you can't do that because you have no idea of the trade-off that you're going to get as a result of doing that elsewhere.
Right.
And you go, well, any trade-off you're going to get is a positive one, not a negative one, in my opinion. But those were the sort of discussions that you had to have. And thankfully, education and evolution now means that younger farriers don't have to have those conversations.
Yeah, that doesn't have to be repeated.
That's a good thing, I think.
Just in the conversation that I witnessed outside as we were coming in here, you have this ability to see a middle path. You're very good with reading people and being able to have a discussion with them without ego. I imagine a lot of the conversations with the vets and stuff weren't, hold my beer, this is what I'm going to do, and watch, it just works. You have a discussion, you explain where you're coming from, and you get people to embrace it even as their own. They are a part of that process. And I think that goes a long way. Ben and I were talking about that in his interview. A lot of what we do, in the end, the humans are writing the checks. The horses aren't. You can be the most talented farrier in the world, but if you aren't really good with dealing with other people, then you're going to struggle.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And, there is always middle ground. And I suppose sometimes I've never been one to bang the table and say, this has got to be done.
Right.
What I can do is hopefully through discussion is bring people on board. And if you only bring them on perhaps 50% of how much you want to, then that is acceptable, because when you've brought them on at the 50% and they haven't quite bought into everything, or you haven't pushed the parameters of what you want to do. So if you can see somebody's a little bit resistant, you go, well, actually, what we can do is we can do this. Because when they see the positive effect of that, then they will give you the 100%.
Right.
And sometimes that's a journey that you have to go through. And I think it's a really important one to recognize what is the expected outcome and how do you manage expectations. And expectations to different people can sometimes mean different things. So it's recognizing that and just talking it through, just because you wear a badge, just because you've got some position that you hold, respect is something that you have to earn. It's not a God-given right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always been my approach, that you get the respect. And hopefully then once you have the respect, very often, I don't have discussions with my clients anymore, unless there's a problem.
Right.
And because they just say, you'll do whatever you want to do. And I perhaps will change something, perhaps depending on the season, depending on the individual horse that I'm looking at. So that, you start off on day one and you've got to do this. And 6 months down the line, and at the end of a long season, you've got to do something slightly differently to keep it sound.
Right.
They just let me do it.
You've built that trust.
Yes, it's trust. But you have to earn that.
I've said this a few times this weekend. There's no shortcut to that.
No.
It's time, experience, and proving it over and over again.
And getting it wrong.
Yeah.
And when you get it wrong, it's holding your hand up and admit, I got this wrong.
Right.
Don't hide behind that. We've all made mistakes, and because of what we do for a living and what we're dealing with. And if we've done something and it hasn't had the positive effect, rather than try to defend it, you go, do you know what? You're right. We'll try something else.
Now, working with horses at that level that you do, it takes some bravery to admit that you're wrong, because I think a lot of those people expect perfection every time. Now, is that just through managing expectations that you're able to do that? If something goes wrong, to say, hey, listen, I tried this, it didn't work, let's try this? Or did you have certain clients where they're no longer your client because that just wasn't the way it was going to work with them?
I think you'd have to ask them. I'd like to think not. I don't think anybody, and any of the people that I've had working with me over the years, I've always said to them, you will never, ever, ever.
If you would like to hear this episode in its entirety, please subscribe using the link in the show notes. Thank you for listening.